I'm a leaner Vance, and I'm 34. For the first time in 15 years, my mother called me this past April. Not to apologize, but to inform you that, since they kicked me out at the age of 19, she and my dad should have received 30% of the 14 businesses I founded. The same father who smiled while standing on our front porch with his arms folded. "You'll be begging on the street," he said. For 15 years, I thought that porch was the worst thing my family had ever done to me. I was mistaken. When their lawsuit arrived on my desk in May, I discovered something deeper than anything they had done to me when I was 19, hidden in a 16-year-old docket file. When it was all finished, I sent my mother the gift. She didn't anticipate that. Welcome back to Inheritance Chronicles, where silent individuals finally speak out and family secrets are revealed. This tale begins with 2 duffel bags on a porch in June and concludes with an envelope my mother will never forget. If you like reading stories about holding your ground on long trips and quiet nights, please leave a comment below and make sure to subscribe. I was raised in a home where love had an accounting system in Creston Falls, Ohio. The shopping receipts were attached in blue ink, divided 3 ways, on the refrigerator door by my mother, Brenda. My portion was highlighted. She carried the ledgers, not the paper ones you carry in your chest, home from her part-time job as an accountant for a farm supply firm. Harold, my father, had a farm equipment parts business on Route 9. Additionally, the home could sense that the shop was losing money by the time I was in middle school. Dinner was given every night with a single lecture. Mom would nod as if he had spoken scripture when Dad said, "Nobody eats for free in this house." I requested running shoes for track season when I was 14. I received them. In the notepad my mother kept in the kitchen drawer, I also found a line. Shoes made progress in relation to future contributions. When I was 15, I worked as a dishwasher at a restaurant on the weekends, and my parents put half of every salary into the family fund. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. In our area, many families were close, yet tight does not equate to harsh. Our lack of funds was not what set our home apart. The accounting was the cause. There was a balance due for every act of generosity. There was interest in every present. Before I learned to ride a bike, I learned how to read and understand the numbers on the refrigerator. You were not a daughter in this home. You were by yourself. However, there was a yellow kitchen on Maple Court 6 blocks away where none of those regulations applied. It was run by a lady who was also my father's mother. Margaret Vance, my grandmother, had a kitchen that smelled like yeast and brown butter all year long. For 40 years, she had prepared meals for church gatherings, funeral lunches, and before its closure, the lunch counter at Hardin's Drug downtown. There was only one location where she knew everything. A large notepad covered in blue fabric. Like an old dollar note, its spine is soft. Her crooked handwriting filled every page. Saturday mornings with biscuits. When the first frost appeared, it was chicken pot pie. She never took measurements in front of me. After pressing my hands into the dough, she would remark, "There, that's what ready feels like." From the age of 10, I spent every weekend at her place. My mom detested it. Mom referred to Grandma's kitchen as that soup kitchen and claimed it was inappropriate for a lady who gave away all she could sell to lecture others about money. They were both courteous in the manner that ice is courteous. But at the conclusion of a season, Grandma fed all the agricultural laborers. The children of Kowalski, whose father once knocked on the wrong house and took a pie. One Saturday, I asked her why, despite Mom's insistence that we charge. She never did. She stared at me after wiping the bloom from her hands. The manner in which you gaze at someone you are leaving something to. She remarked, "We feed people because they are hungry, not because they can afford it." I was 12. I assumed that was a pie rule. My grandmother saw precisely the kind of home I was growing up in. So it took me 22 years in court to realize it was a rule about everything, and that she had stated it to me on purpose. And she had already begun to pull me out, discreetly and in her own manner. When I was 16, almost 17, in the spring of 2009, Grandma's heart began to fail. She was unable to stand at the stove for more than a few minutes by that autumn. So, like a little flour-dusted general, I went over after school and cooked as she oversaw from a kitchen chair. Even then, I knew they were the happiest afternoons of my life. I heard my mother's voice coming from the front room one early November evening as I entered via the rear door with groceries. Mom seldom ever went to Maple Court. I paused in the corridor. With a folder of documents on her lap, Mom was seated next to Grandma's chair. Her speech had the cheerful, calm tone she used while speaking to bank tellers. "It's just paperwork, Mom. I'll take care of everything if you sign it." My grandmother's voice, thin as tissue but with iron behind it, was heard after a moment. Everything I intended to sign had already been signed. I was 17. I assumed they were discussing insurance. Mom snapped the folder shut once I brought the goods in, and nobody else mentioned anything. Grandma gave me the blue notepad 6 weeks later, just before Christmas. Like something warm from the oven, she had wrapped it in a dish towel. "This is yours," she said. "Keep it out of her reach." I recall asking where she couldn't, what while smiling and feeling a bit uneasy. Grandma just clasped my hands around the cover and stroked them. On February 9, 2010, she passed away. It snowed one morning. My mother put her hand on my arm at the funeral meal prepared by the church women using her own recipes and offered to keep the notebook secure at our home. I informed her that I had previously placed it in a secure location. I had never lied to my mother before. She would inquire again in the future. Everyone in the home knew that my father's shop was failing 16 months later, in June of 2011. I was 19. After completing a year at the Mansfield Community College, I dropped out of school due to financial difficulties and began working full-time as a waiter at a highway cafe along Route 30. 40 hours, occasionally 50, clean paychecks. One Sunday evening, my parents convened what my mother liked to refer to as a family meeting, which had me sitting on one side of the kitchen table and the two of them on the other. Dad handed me a folder. There was a $40,000 loan application from Harland County Savings to refinance the shop. His reputation was ruined. His and Mom's were intertwined. A cosigner with spotless credit and consistent income was what the bank was looking for. The only person the bank would trust at that table was me, a 19-year-old. Mom then pulled out her notepad from the kitchen drawer and flipped it over for me to view. 19 years, backdated to my 16th birthday, itemized including diapers, braces, running shoes, lodging and board, and monthly construction. The $16,000 total was emphasized twice at the bottom. She said, "We're not asking you for money," in the tone of a bank teller. "We are requesting that you support this family in the same manner that this family supported you." I want to be clear about what I fully comprehended at that very time. I had seen the shelves in the shop. I had seen that the parking lot was vacant. It wasn't a rescue to cosign. It was a funeral, and I planned that they had chosen. The bank would come for the sole individual in the home who had anything left to take if that shop failed. I turned to face my dad across the table and said, "No." I knew precisely what was going to happen as Dad carefully closed the folder. I was given till Saturday. As I packed, my mother stood in the kitchen with her arms crossed, watching to make sure I didn't take anything she had purchased, which, according to her ledger, was everything. I took a shoe box filled with paperbacks, 2 duffel bags of clothing, and my grandmother's blue notepad, which was hidden under my jacket. Mom didn't scream at the door. She did not use yelling as a tool. "When you're ready to contribute," she said, "you know the number," as if I were a client with an outstanding bill. The person on the porch was my dad. It was June's second Saturday. It was warm, and the neighbor's sprinkler was ticking away as if nothing had happened. With a glance, Dad leaned on the railing. I still can't quite put it into words. Yes, there was anger, but there was also a sense of relief behind it, similar to a guy writing off a poor investment. He responded, "You'll be begging on the street." Then he chuckled. A little dry, definite chuckle, not a villainous one from a movie. The sort when you tell a joke you've heard before. Give it half a year. I spent 11 nights in my 1998 Corolla. The security officer pretended not to notice me when I parked behind the save lot. I used a gas station sink to wash my hair. To keep my work clothes from wrinkling, I hung them on the hook above the rear seat. And I didn't miss a single shift in 11 days. Anyone who works at the restaurant can tell you. I had no control over anything else. I thus had control over it. I used to lie across the back seat at night and listen to it repeatedly as I begged on the street. Give it 6 months. As of yet, I had no plan. I had a vehicle that smelled like fryer oil and a notepad that I couldn't stop reading by candlelight. Then there was a knock on my window on the morning of the 12th. My Aunt Patricia had an envelope with the handwriting of a deceased person. The only person at the funeral who gave me a genuine embrace was Patricia, my dad's younger sister and a nurse in Mansfield. At the cafe where I worked, she bought me breakfast, seated me in my own section, which seemed absurd, and passed the envelope across the table. "Your grandmother gave me this in 2009, she said. She gave precise directions. I was supposed to save it until you really needed it, not a day earlier. I was informed of what transpired. That's right today, in my opinion." I had to read the bank paperwork 3 times before my hands understood what was within. It was a first merchant bank account that was payable upon death. 2009 saw its opening. 26,500 is the balance. Eleanor Vance is the beneficiary, neither my mother nor my father, me. A ripped half-sheet of paper with the slanted handwriting I recognized more than my own was folded around it. For a start, a flower and rent. For no one's debts. M. I sobbed for the first time since the porch while sitting in the booth in my apron, spilling large, ugly tears into a platter of eggs that I had personally prepared. Even after my grandma passed away 16 months ago, she continued to be the only caregiver for me. She had also known. Take another look at the notes, not for anyone's debts. Before anybody opened the loan folder, she had seen it coming. I heard the rest from Patricia. Grandma had made her pledge to keep it away from my parents, set it up discreetly, and informed no one except herself. I followed the note's instructions perfectly. I paid no attention to anyone's ledger. I began pricing second-hand food trucks, leased a room above a hardware shop for $280 a month, created an account at a different bank 1 town away, and claimed the account with her death certificate. The section you should cling to is this one. 15 years later, my parents would testify under oath in court that the money and all it created had always belonged to them. I worked double shifts for 2 years before I felt confident enough to squander her money. I discovered a decommissioned step van at a Marin auction in the spring of 2013. $11,000, gutted kitchen, engine sound. The fact that permits and licenses soaked up the majority of the remaining funds after repairs and equipment cost an additional $4,000 tells you everything about my margin for error. No one was present. Over the course of 3 nights, I painted it myself in a gentle butter yellow and hand-lettered the side. Margaret's table. 5 recipes from the blue notebook made up the dinner. Additionally, I want to be truthful about the job since it will be important in the future. I didn't make a business out of photocopying my grandmother's papers. 8 people were fed by her recipes on a farmhouse stove. For a lunch rush and a 3-burner queue, I rebuilt them. They were tested on my own paychecks, rescaled, retimed, and costed down to the last cent until they consistently came out correct. It took me 40 attempts just for the biscuits. I sold 19 orders on my first day, which was a Tuesday outside the county fairs. It may not seem like much, but that evening I drove back to my leased room with $61 in a cigar box. I sat on the floor and chuckled until the man below pounded on his ceiling and begged on the street. I was selling biscuits on the street, and they were all mine. Inside the taxi, just above the visor, I taped my first dollar next to a card on which I had handwritten her words. People are fed because they are hungry, not because they can afford it. The summer was enjoyable. The fall was enjoyable. The winter of 2013 then arrived, almost completing what my parents had begun. A food truck in an Ohio winter is a savings account with a hole in it, but nobody tells you that. By January 2014, my generator failed during the coldest week of the year, the office parks were deserted by 5, and the fair people had vanished. $600. I didn't. I performed the math of quitting while sitting in the taxi with the notepad and calculator. Propane, insurance, rent, and perhaps 12 weeks of runway time. The recipe for chicken pot pie is on a page in the blue notebook that was dog-eared long before I got it. Additionally, my grandma had put a message to nobody for chilly days under the ingredients in the margin. Give them food first. Before I heard that sentence, I must have read it 100 times. Give them food first. I prepared 40 pot pies on a Thursday in February, drove to the Worcester Road bus stop, where the packing plant's night shift workers waited in the dark, and distributed them. Each last person received a paper card with the location of the vehicle parked attached to the box. My last butter and flour were thrown into the cold for naught. For 6 days, it seemed like my mother would have been correct to label it as insanity. There was a queue when I returned to the bus station on Thursday, the 7th day. A foreman who ordered a dozen for his whole crew, plant employees, and their spouses. Margaret's table survived that winter and all subsequent winters thanks to Pot Pie Thursday. And while it wasn't a marketing ploy, it never once seemed that way. Her reign was in effect. Give them food first. And in March, on a gloomy afternoon, a guy wearing a Carhartt jacket gave me something I hadn't allowed myself to crave after finishing his pie and wiping his hands. For 31 years, *Earl Dressler* has been the owner of a cafe on Columbus East Side. He had been traveling to my vehicle every Thursday for a month. His knees were done, and his children were in Arizona. "You cook as somebody taught you right," he said. "When I retire, I don't want to see my house become a vape store." I was allowed to lease the building. A bank would never have granted seller-financed conditions to a lady with a food truck and a worthless last name in that county. When I signed the documents in March 2015 at the age of 22, my hands were trembling so much that I dated the signature incorrectly and had to initial the correction. I'm not proud of the hours I put in during that first year. Prep till midnight, open at 6:00, closed at 9:00, books until 2:00. Due to a walk-in freezer breakdown, I was unable to attend my best friend's wedding. Before he quit calling, I had to cancel 3 dates with the same patient guy. That's okay, I reminded myself. I'll deal with love later. The finest choice I ever made in that facility was to employ Jess Morin * to manage the front of house in 2016. By autumn, she was the one who knew me the best. I shrugged it off when she leaned over the counter one night after close and said, "You know what's weird? We're not broke. You run this place like you're paying off a debt nobody can see." She was watching me recount a drawer that had already been counted twice. I heard her say, "Old habit." I didn't pay attention when I hung her bell on the door. It would take me 10 more years to figure out whose ledger I was still working from. A letter with a postmark from Creston Falls arrived at the restaurant that Christmas. I want to take a moment to ask you a question. If someone ever warned you that you wouldn't succeed, you would use it as motivation. Let me know in the comments where you were on the day you made the decision to disprove them. Everyone was read by me. We're getting to the moment when my parents reappear in this narrative, and it's worse than you could imagine, so if you're new here, please subscribe. My mother's handwriting was on the envelope. It was little, tidy, and tilted forward as though it was eager to gather. Before I even opened it, I felt like a 15-year-old again as I stood at the register and saw a Christmas card with snow on a covered bridge. Her words were written underneath the blue-inked welcome, but there was no letter. The eatery is reportedly doing well. It would be good if you could recall your origins. Your refusal to assist caused your father's business to collapse. That was the whole message. This flag was erected by my family after 5 years of quiet. No, how are you doing? No address. No phone number. A 50-cent card with 1 line of credit taking and 1 line of blaming. In 2012, the store closed. Patricia had informed me that the failure had been discreetly transferred into my column of the ledger somewhere in Creston Falls. How a bad debt might be reclassified. That evening, I drafted a response while sitting at the office. It is 6 pages long. Everything. The automobile, the gas station sink, the porch, and the 11 nights. After that, I read it again and listened to how it sounded. Like an invoice, as evidence that I was still working with them on arithmetic. I made a 10-year choice after tearing it up and throwing it in the fryer oil bucket. No communication, not out of animosity, nor out of math. There was a cost to every interaction with my mother, and at last I could no longer afford her. But I saved the card. At the time, I was unable to explain why. I can now do so because 10 years later, I would come across the identical tidy forward-slanted handwriting on a paper bearing the signature of a 16-year-dead lady in a court petition. Here's the next 10 years at a speed that would please my banker. In 2016, I launched a second shop in Westerville, which was a defunct pizzeria with nice bones. There were 4 by 2018, and it was like losing a tooth when I stopped mentally carrying the timetable for each business. We switched to family meal boxes and pot pies by the dozen on porches across 3 counties when the epidemic almost destroyed everything. It turns out that people needed precisely what a lady born in 1938 understood how to manufacture during the worst year anybody could recall. There were 8 by 2021, 12 by 2024. There are now 14 Margaret's tables in Central Ohio, 340 employees, and a suspended meal board at each register. We pin the ticket when you purchase food for a stranger. It is taken by anybody who needs it. No inquiries. It's what corporate would refer to as brand identity. It's not. It's a pie rule. I fulfilled my self-promise with a cold food truck in 2023. I paid off the seller financing 3 years ahead of schedule, purchased Earl's building completely, and delivered him a picture of the title along with a pot pie. I framed the napkin he sent back with the words, "Proud of you, kid." By early 2026, I want you to see what Clear's throat my life was like. Active, helpful, and full of the folks I choose. I still did all of the company's figures by myself twice a night in January. A lady with 340 workers continued to count as if someone were going to verify her calculations. Then, a magazine phoned in March 2026, and the week the article appeared, my calm, meticulous 15-year piece came to a close. For their spring edition, Ohio Business Monthly requested a profile. 1 grandmother's journal, 14 eateries. The headline was just that. To be honest, I agreed to some of the hiring drive. 32 years after the lunch shop closed, Margaret Vance's name appears in printed tea and her cuisine is referred to as an institution. In defiance of my own instincts, I let the photographer take a picture of me holding the blue notepad at the flagship's pass window. Her crooked lettering filled half the frame on one biscuit-stained sheet. It was picked up by a Columbus station and broadcast for 2 minutes on the evening news. I spoke her line about starving folks while standing at the stove. The wistful head tilt is being performed by the anchor. The artwork moved. It made its way to Creston Falls by dinner time after being circulated the state on small-town news sites and religious Facebook groups. At the bar, Jess smiled at me over the rim of her phone as she watched the segment. I hope no one in your family watches TV. We chuckled. I want the record to reflect that. We chuckled. After 2 weeks, a number I hadn't seen in 15 years would ring on my phone, and it wouldn't be humorous at all. However, the notebook itself had one more thing to teach me before that call ever arrived. It required a stranger with a needle and thread to discover what my grandma had carefully and skillfully concealed. On an ancient book, all that filming had been difficult. Threads were falling off the spine. I was more terrified of losing the 2 loose autographs on the pages than I had ever been of a health inspection. I brought it to a meticulous lady called Asterisk Ruth, who was a book conservator in a German hamlet, and she treated it like a surgeon. 4 days later, she gave me a call, and there was an odd concern in her voice. "Did you realize that the back cover contains anything, Ms. Vance?" She said that the backboard was thicker than the front. Beneath the fabric, a manila envelope, velvety with age, was hand-stitched flat against the cardboard using thread. The day they come for this is written in the calligraphy on the front. My grandma talked to me from 16 years away as I stood in Ruth's store and opened it with her letter knife. The letter was brief, with one page dated October 2009, the same autumn I'd stood in her hallway and heard my mother's cheery voice remark, "It's just paperwork." If anybody ever wondered what her handwriting was, it indicated where to locate it. The first merchant's signature card from 2008, the sign-in ledgers from the church kitchen, the letters she had written Patricia every month for 20 years, a map of a deceased woman's hand, and 3 lines at the bottom that I have committed to memory like a prayer. I was asked to sign documents about my recipes twice by Brenda. I didn't sign. A document is lying if it claims I did. With the envelope perched on the passenger seat like a live creature, I drove home. I still didn't get it. There was just a magazine article and a spring evening. No fight, no lawsuit. I placed it in the flagship safe and informed precisely one person, nobody. 9 days later, when standing in the same kitchen, I saw a word that I had removed from my contacts 10 years before appear on my phone. Mom. I let it ring 4 times. When I heard my mother's voice again, I answered it while standing at the pass window because a part of me wanted to be close to her notepad. No. Hi there. No, 15 years. In the same manner that others begin with a name, Brenda Vance began with a number. The article has been seen by us. I gazed at the phone the way people do in movies when she stated, "Eleanor, we've talked to someone, and we think 30% is fair." "All right," I said. "Your father's mother's recipes built every one of those kitchens. Margaret was young. Her food belongs to this family, and you've been selling it for 13 years without so much as a phone call." I kept my voice level, which I'd learned in the worst kitchen of my life. Hers. "You put me on the street with 2 bags, I said. There wasn't a phone to call. She didn't miss a beat. She never misses a beat. We taught you independence. Look what you did with it. And this is how you repay it. There it was. Repay 34 years old, 14 restaurants, and my mother could still find the ledger in any sentence. She talked for 2 more minutes about family, about what people in town were saying, about how her and Dad's retirement had been stolen by that store, how I owed them a legacy. And then she said the line I already told you about, the one I think she'd rehearsed. "Everything you are, you owe to this family." I looked down the line of my kitchen. My cooks, my burners, my grandmother's biscuits browning in a convection oven she never lived to see. "No," I said, "everything I am, someone in this family gave me for free. Mom, there's a difference. You've just never once been on the right side of it." I hung up. My hands were steady. The following Friday, a man in a gray shirt walked into the flagship at lunch rush and asked politely if I was Eleanor Vance. He was a process server, and he handed me a thick envelope in front of a full dining room. Harold and Brenda Vance, Plaintiffs versus Eleanor Vance and RT Restaurant Group, LLC. I snorts read it that night at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I never touched. The claims were unjust enrichment and constructive trust. My parents were asking a judge to declare that 30% of everything I owned had really been theirs all along. And the spine of the whole thing, Exhibit A, was a document I had never seen or heard of in my life. A codicil, an amendment to my grandmother's will, dated November 3, 2009, in which Margaret Vance supposedly left all recipes, notebooks, and culinary property to her son, Harold. Recently discovered, the filing said, in a box of the deceased's belongings. I read that date 3 times. November 2009. The same month, I stood in a hallway with grocery bags and heard, "It's just paperwork." My grandmother sewed a map into a book cover that same fall, and the Creston Falls paper published it by Sunday. The local restaurant owner was sued by her own parents over her late grandmother's recipes, and the comment section did what comment sections do. Half the town called my parents shameful, but the other half knew better. "Today's kids become famous and forget who raised them," one woman wrote. "She probably did take what wasn't hers." My father's old poker buddy called me a thief with a nice smile. The term begging kept coming up from 15 years ago as I sat in my office, listening to strangers argue about whether or not I was a monster. The street was finally here, as he had promised, but it wasn't me standing on the curb pleading with passers-by for something I hadn't earned. I made a call to Columbus' top probate litigator on Monday morning. Her name was Dana Whitfield ***, and I knew I had made the proper decision since there was no waiting room music in her office. However, the lawsuit had begun collecting its rent before I even made it to her conference room. While the lawsuit was ongoing, the first merchant halted building on restaurant number 15. Nothing personal, just standard procedure. In a single phone call, I heard this sentence 4 times. Midway into the drywall, the Zanesville build-out came to an end. Silently, 2 of my top general managers changed their resume. I claimed not to know that Jess had talked one of them over the brink in the walk-in. That's the part of a nuisance lawsuit that no one warns you about. You don't have to win for it to be costly. It just must exist. After reading the lawsuit for 10 minutes or so, Dana sat down and provided me with the most thorough legal analysis I have ever paid for. Poor legislation. A 16-year-old lawsuit appearing 3 weeks after you're on television is the type of coincidence judges notice, she added, and recipes aren't property you can patent. This is a costly annoyance. Miss Vance, they're not wagering on winning. They're wagering that you'll pay to put an end to it. After that, she brought the exhibit a copy to her and studied the signature for a long, silent moment, long enough for me to stop breathing. I was unable to read Margaret Vance's looping script above a witness line. I said, "Something wrong." Dana took a while to respond. Like a jeweler with a stone she didn't trust, she rotated the page 90 degrees and then back again. The most bizarre question of that whole bizarre spring was then posed to me by my lawyer. "Your grandmother," she murmured. "Did she send Christmas cards?" It was a query I didn't really get at first. And Dana, being Dana, refused to explain until she had more than a suspicion. We started by excavating. The Harland County Courthouse still had the 2010 probate file, which had a straightforward narrative. The estate of my grandma had been tidy and modest. Dad and Patricia divided the sale of the Maple Court residence. She gave the church her kitchenware and furnishings. A simple 2-page 1998 will. Correctly attested, correctly filed, but nowhere. Not in the inventory, not in the will, not in a single line of 16-year-old documents. Is there any reference to a codicil, recipes, cooking, anything? My parents' attorney had filed a motion to reopen the estate to get their new document, stating that the codicil had just recently been discovered in a box in their attic last autumn. Dana answered, "Courts allow it rarely, but the judge will want to know where it's been, and so do I. After 16 years, I finally took the action I had been considering for a week. I placed my grandmother's sewn-in envelope on Dana's desk after opening my bag. The list, the letter, and the bottom 3 lines. Dana read it twice. My attorney is not a sentimental lady. I have never seen her raise her voice, yet she bills in 6-minute intervals. However, if an article ever claims that she did, it is a falsehood." She used 2 fingers to put the paper down, gently as if it were both proof and china. "Your grandma is going to testify, Ms. Vance," she added. Snorts after that, she took a legal pad and began making her own list. Her penmanship will be required. Everything. On God's green land, this lady left behind every letter, ledger, and signature. So we went to collect my granny piece by piece. At her Mansfield kitchen table, Patricia greeted us with a fireproof box that she had stored for 16 years. The letters Margaret had sent her each month from 1990 until 3 months before her death were included therein. They were mailed, signed, and dated in the hundreds. The sign-in ledgers were still in the church kitchen. In the background of 20 years of funeral dinners, her name. She presented her 2008 signing card as the first merchant under subpoena. By the end of the week, Dana's paralegal had created a 20-year timeline of my grandmother's handwriting, and I had read a dead woman's correspondence with my aunt for 3 nights, alternately laughing and crying. Patricia told me the thing I didn't want to hear on the last one of those nights. "You should know something about Brenda," she said. Not kindly, not unkindly. The sheriff placed your mother's family's furniture on the grass when she was 9 years old. The neighbors were observing everything they had on the lawn. Wearing her school clothes, she stood on the pavement, watching over a light. I remained silent. She was raised to believe that the only things that are untouchable are those that bear your name. The first week your dad brought her home, your grandma saw it in her. Margaret never allowed Brenda to go close to her documents because of this, not out of animosity. She just understood what hunger looks like when it develops. After sitting with it for a while, I felt an inch of movement in my chest. I would have opened every register I possess for a 9-year-old watching over a light on the pavement. Then I recalled spending 11 nights behind the stove, a lot in a Corolla, organized by the lady that little girl grew up to be. Forgiveness and understanding are two different things. I put the letters in my trunk like a wake casserole. Now all we needed was one individual who could write 200 letters in response to one query. Doctor was her name. For 19 years, Meredith Ockhafer ***, a board-certified forensic document examiner, has been advising courts on whether or not paper was lying. She took the exemplars and the codicil for 3 weeks. After that, she brought us in, placed 2 pictures side by side on a screen, and in 10 minutes, I learned more about my mother than I had in 34 years. According to her, no 2 authentic autographs are the same. Not on the same day, not from the same hand, and never. Your hand is a living organism. It varies. She superimposed the 2 pictures. This codicil's signature matches one particular known signature exactly. The one on this 2003 Christmas card that your granny sent. Line weight, letter spacing, and the R break are all the same. Miss Vance, that doesn't occur in nature. That takes place patiently on a light table. She showed us the remainder under magnification. Where a pen had crawled rather than flowed is shown by hesitation. The 2 witnesses to the codicil, the fossil of a tracing, and faint pencil traces under the ink each told their own tale. According to the county's own records, one of my grandmother's neighbors passed away in 2007, 2 years before the day he allegedly saw her signing. The other was my mother's 30-year card, gaming buddy, *Sharon Puit*. The 2 signatures nestled within each other like one ghost wearing another as I gazed at the overlay for a long time. Patricia verified that the 2003 Christmas card had been in a picture book in my parents' living room for the previous 20 years. My grandmother's autograph was nowhere to be found. In a garden of old holiday mail, she had cultivated a dead woman's hand. After allowing me to consider it, Dana spoke the words that changed the course of the conflict. One difficulty exists. According to the document, your father will attest to the authenticity of the codicil. Thus, we will ascertain Harold Vance's true knowledge before using this. Let me mention one thing before we enter the deposition room. I'm sorry, and you're not alone if a piece of paper, a will, a deed, or anything else ever tore your family apart. Every week, the comments under these videos demonstrate this. My mother entered that room certain that she had won, so if you want to remain to the finish, subscribe. What was in Dana's folder was unknown to her. On a Tuesday in July, with a court reporter whose keyboard clicked like a sluggish clock, we deposed my father in Dana's conference room. 15 years. Once again, he stood across a table, smaller than the guy on the porch, with hands like old rope, 70% of his hair gone gray, and the remaining portion yielding. He refused to look at me. Dana gently guided him through it, and since he accepted what she said, his narrative came out smoothly. Last autumn, Brenda had been tidying up the attic. A box containing his mother's belongings was discovered by Brenda. He knew his mother's signature at the bottom of the cursive that Brenda had brought to the kitchen table, much as you would identify a voice on the phone. I couldn't help but notice something unexpected that entered his face as he said it. Even at 65 years old, with relief and pride. Finally, there was a piece of paper stating that his mother, who had prepared meals for the whole county, but oddly never for his aspirations, had chosen him after all. She had missed his store's big opening in favor of a church funeral lunch and had bequeathed her single treasure to his teenage daughter. Not only did he think the codicil was genuine, it had to be for him. Observing my father across the table, I realized precisely what I was holding with a chill that had nothing to do with rage. He was unaware. This meant that my argument would not simply be won by the truth. I would be the one who sent it, and it would enter that man's home, take a seat at his kitchen table, and steal his mother and wife that same afternoon. My parents' attorney sent me an email that evening. Subject: suggestion for settlement. Before I opened it, I recall thinking, whatever this is, it's a door. I had no idea how much a part of me would want to go through it. You can tell that the offer was written by a lawyer and authorized by a mother, since it was nearly kind. In return for $200,000, my parents would drop all of the lawsuit's claims by Friday. It was referred to in the letter as a goodwill resolution honoring the family legacy. This line, which I have retained, would come after a mutual secrecy agreement. Your parents are optimistic that the family may now start to heal when this is over. Brenda had added as advice that your folks are elderly, a leaner. This is your opportunity to put things right. There was an invoice for even her kindness. In my office, Jess read it and said what any reasonable friend would: make the payment. It's less expensive than a year of this, and it's nasty. The loan is released by the bank. The supervisors remain. By spring, Zanesville opens. The finest bargain you will ever get is $200,000 to make your parents disappear forever. Dana was just Dana. In terms of business, you and her would be finished by Friday. You are the only one who can weigh everything else. This is what I want you to know about that evening, because it's the most important and least proud portion of my narrative. I almost made the payment while sitting at my kitchen table till 2 a.m. I was able to pay for it. A mother who may, peace, a signature, and an open bank line. The old hope reappeared like a corpse, and it may at last say something positive about what I had created. All I needed to do was pay one last payment that I didn't owe and maintain a little lifelong secret about one fake signature. I then pulled up my grandmother's letter and read the last 3 words once again. I was asked twice by Brenda. I didn't sign. A document is lying if it claims I did. She had not urged me to prevail. I was urged to stop the deception by her. I had a brief conversation with Dana when I phoned her in the morning. Submit the report. I wasn't asked whether I was certain by Dana. Her hand had been on the lever as she waited. By that afternoon, Dr. Ackhaffer's conclusions, together with our application for penalties for filing a claim based on a forged document and a notice, were in the court file, a public record accessible to any clerk, reporter, or interested neighbor in Harland County. The next Tuesday, we would be taking Brenda Vance under oath to testify about the finding of the codicil. Since I knew everything at the time I provided the directive, I want to be truthful about what I knew. I was aware that once the report was in the world, it could never be removed. I was certain that my dad would either read it, hear it, or have a reporter read it to him on his porch. I had just let go of the vehicle, and I realized that everything that remained of my parents' 42-year marriage was standing in the road. Some would argue that it was only a litigation tactic and that I had no other option. I won't hide behind it because it's untrue. I had a door marked silence and 200,000, and I deliberately shut it with my own hand. My next action was more modest. My father had seldom talked to my Aunt Patricia in years, so I texted her just this: next week, stay close to your brother. Someone other than Brenda will be necessary for him. Brett doesn't give a damn about your subpoenas, so I returned to work. On the last Tuesday of July, Brenda Vance's deposition was scheduled for 9 a.m. With new lipstick and the grin of a lady who still thought she had the ledger, she entered that conference room. She was unaware that she was the entry. She was dressed in the gray jacket she keeps for funerals and banks. My mother responded to Dana's kind, careful queries in her cheerful teller's voice for 40 minutes, and I watched her construct her own structure while sitting still at the end of the table. The box was located where? The attic behind the Christmas ornaments. When? October of last autumn. Who was there? Harold and her. Before she passed away, had she ever spoken to Margaret about the recipes? My mother gave herself a brief, hurt moment here. I wasn't close to Margaret. Although she was a difficult lady, she understood the value of family. She understood the recipes belonged to the family, whatever else. The keys of the court reporter clicked. Like a lady doing a crossword puzzle, Dana nodded along. She opened her folder after that. "I'm giving you Exhibit 12, Mrs. Vance, which is a Christmas card that Margaret Vance sent to Patricia Reyes in December 2003. Can you identify the signature?" My mom looked at it. "Margaret owns it." Dana said that it is. "Exhibit 13 now." She then placed the transparency over the careful signature and moved it across the table. Two names scrawled 6 years apart, nestled into one another like a single ghost, were clearly visible in the fluorescent light. "Mrs. Vance, could you tell me how your mother-in-law wrote her name twice, 6 years apart? Similar to a penstroke's breadth. I've been in walk-in freezers that were warmer than the room. The overlay was not examined by my mother." She glanced down the length of the table at me, past Dana, past her own attorney. Furthermore, there was neither dread nor guilt on her face. It was rage, the unadulterated, baffled rage of a bookkeeper whose numbers no longer obeyed her. "You ungrateful," she started, and her lawyer's hand closed on her arm, and he asked for a recess in a voice that had gone a little gray. Chairs scraped, people stood, and in the noise of it. My father, who had come as a plaintiff and sat all morning by the window, silent, reached across the abandoned table and picked up the overlay with both hands, carefully, the way you'd pick up a photograph of someone you'd buried. He held it up to the light for a long time. Then he turned to my mother and he asked her very quietly, "Brenda, where did you get my mother's Christmas card?" Nobody answered him. The room emptied into the hallway, and that hallway is where my story was always going to be decided, not by the overlay, but by what I did next. Their lawyer came to us within the hour, quiet as a man diffusing something. The lawsuit would be dismissed immediately with prejudice, gone forever. They would cover every dollar of my legal fees. In exchange, the expert report would be withdrawn from the file, the record sealed. Mutual confidentiality. His hand made a small smoothing motion so that what's in that folder stays in this building. No one outside this room ever needs to know. And there it was, laid out on a hallway bench. Everything I had wanted since the day the process server interrupted my lunch rush. The case dead. The bank unfrozen. Zanesville open by spring. My parents' marriage left standing. My father left with his merciful lie. The town left with a boring story about a family that settled a misunderstanding. All I had to do was help bury my grandmother's signature a second time. Dana laid out my options in her flat, kind way. Take the seal, and it ends now, W clean. Refuse, C and the truth stays public forever. And she reminded me of one more thing. The report was strong enough to refer for criminal charges. "Forgery. My call," she said. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see my father alone at the long table, the overlay still in his hands. Reading it over and over like a man trying to translate his own life, 65 years old, hungry his whole life, for one sentence from his mother, and holding proof that the only version of it he'd ever gotten was counterfeit. I heard my grandmother then, clear as a Saturday morning. "We feed people because they're hungry." The truth was the only thing I had left to set in front of him, and it was going to taste lick ash, and it was still food. I turned back to Dana and I kept my tone calm. No seal, no confidentiality. The report stays in the record, all of it. Dismissal with prejudice, and they pay your fee, and we're done. I took a breath at TH and no criminal referral. I'm not sending my mother to be prosecuted. I'm done collecting. That's the whole point. Somebody in this family has to be the first one to stop collecting. They took the deal because there was nothing left to take. But before the papers were even drawn, my father did something no one asked him to do. He came back into the conference room, picked up a pen, and withdrew as a plaintiff on his own separate line, his own signature, his hand shaking so hard the court reporter looked away to give him privacy. My mother hissed his name once. Harold, like a command to a dog that had always come. He didn't look at her. On his way out, he stopped in front of me. Up close, he smelled like the store used to machine oil and peppermint. And for a second, I was 9 years old, handing him wrenches. "I said you'd beg," he said. His voice was gravel. "I know," I said. He looked at the floor, then made himself look at me, and I watched it cost him. "You never did." That was all of it. No apology. Men like my father weren't issued the parts for one, but it was the first time in my life he had ever looked at me like a person instead of a balance. Then he walked past his wife of 42 years without turning his head, and Patricia was waiting in the lobby exactly where I'd asked her to be. The court dismissed the case with prejudice in August and ordered my parents to pay my fees. The Creston Falls paper ran the forensic report on the front page because, of course, see it did. And I went back to my kitchens and waited for the thing I somehow knew was still coming. It took 3 weeks. My phone rang on a Tuesday before the morning shift. Same number as April, same voice, same arithmetic. "Your father moved out," my mother said instead of hello. "He's at Patricia's. He filed papers last week, 42Y, Alina, and he filed papers." She waited for me to say something. I stood at the flagship's pass window in the 600 quiet, watching the first trays of biscuits go in, and said nothing at all. So she continued, and her voice found its old rail the way a stream finds a ditch. "I hope you're satisfied. This lawsuit destroyed our family. The lawyers took everything. The town won't look at us at me. And you have 14 restaurants, and we have nothing. The least you can do." And I closed my eyes because I knew the shape of the sentence before it arrived. "Ved is acknowledge that we still deserve something. We raised you. 30% of nothing is nothing, Alina. Be reasonable." There it was, the last page of the ledger. Her husband gone, her name in the newspaper next to the word forged, and my mother was still at her kitchen table billing me. I want to tell you, I felt anger, but that's not what was in my chest. What I felt was finished. The specific bone quiet finished you feel when a long shift ends and the last burner clicks off. Everything I had ever needed to say to my mother, I had already said in a court file, except for one thing, and it was already in the mail. I'd sent it the day the dismissal came through, certified, addressed in my own handwriting to the house I hadn't entered in 15 years. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out kitchen calm, and I said the only thing there was left to say: "Check your mailbox." Then I hung up, turned my phone face down on the pass, and went to pull the biscuits. Here is what was waiting in the mailbox on the house in Creston Falls. Not a check, not shares, not a lawyer's letter. She'd have almost preferred one, because a lawyer's letter is at least a transaction. Inside a plain manila envelope were 3 things. First, a complete copy of Dr. Acapper's report, every page, because my mother had never actually read it, and the truth was the one debt I genuinely owed her. Second, a photocopy of Migrandmother's sewn-in letter with the bottom lines that will outlive all of us. Brenda asked me twice to sign papers about my recipes. I never signed. If a paper ever says I did, it lies. She deserved to know that the woman she'd traced off a Christmas card had seen her coming 16 years ago and had answered her patiently from the grave. And third, on top of the stack, a single recipe card in my own handwriting. Chicken pot pie, her copy complete, nothing held back. The crust, the timing, the margin note, and all. Because one Christmas back when I was small and the world was different, my mother had eaten my grandmother's pot pie at that yellow kitchen table and said, "Aid without an invoice attached. That's wonderful." The only free thing I ever heard her give Margaret Vance. At the bottom of the card under the recipe, I wrote what I'd finally figured out, and I kept it short. No invoice. It was never for sale. It was always free. That was the part you never understood. My mother has not called me since, but Patricia stopped by the house that fall to collect the last of my father's tools, and she told me what she saw in that kitchen. The refrigerator door was bare. No receipts, no blue ink, nothing except one thing, pinned dead center with a magnet, a recipe card for chicken pot pie. The divorce went through in the winter. My father lives in Patricia's spare room now, and once a month he drives to the flagship, sits at the counter like any other customer, and orders the pot pie. He pays every time. I've told him it's free. He leaves the money under the plate anyway, and I've stopped fighting it because I finally understand what it is. It's the only language he has, and he is using it to say something he can't. We don't talk much. We start with silence and work up from there. And some months, that's a kind of peace. The bank released the loan. Zanesville opened the week before Thanksgiving with a line out the door. And on the first Sunday of every month, now at all 14 Margaret's tables, we run what the staff named Margaret Sunday. The long table down the middle, no register, no tickets. Anyone hungry, you should see it. Plant workers and retirees and single mothers, and one very dignified old farmer who always wears a tie to eat for free. This past Sunday, I was in the flagship kitchen teaching biscuits to my newest hire, Tyler, 19 years old, sleeping on a cousin's couch since his folks put him out in March. His first batch came out like hockey pucks, and he braced like he was waiting for a bill. I pressed his hands into the next batch of dough the way she once pressed mine. We feed people because they're hungry, I told him, not because they can pay. His shoulders came down an inch. Somewhere a ledger closed. Here's what my grandmother knew all along. Love that keeps a ledger always ends up in court. But love given freely keeps feeding people long after you're gone. That's my story. 2 duffel bags on a June porch, a letter sewn into a book cover, and a mailbox with no check in it. If someone in your life ever made you feel like a debt instead of a daughter, take this as your sign. The only thing you truly owe anyone is the truth. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that. Drop a comment telling me where you were when you decided to prove them wrong. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next.